She was lying on the floor when I got home from work. My mom's frail body was shaking as I carried her to the car. It was the third time that month. In the last 6 months, ever since Mom dared to challenge Susan Baker at the neighborhood association meeting, our life had turned into hell. "I'm not really sure what's going on," said Dr. Harrison, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the tests. "The symptoms point to poisoning, but we haven't identified the cause. Maybe it's some new food allergy?" Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. I knew that wasn't it. Mom had already gone through every allergy test possible during her previous hospital stays. The dizziness, the nausea, the kidney problems. It all started after that clash with the HOA. It was all because of a garden. Mom always kept small, colorful ceramic figurines in the front yard, reminders of trips she took with Dad before he died. Each one told a story, a happy moment from 42 years of marriage. "Mr. Morrison, the figurines violate Section 17 of the regulations. Susan Baker, the HOA president, left the notice on our door 3 days after Mom questioned the 30% increase in condo fees. Remove them within 48 hours or you'll pay a fine." That was just the beginning. Soon came other notices. Grass taller than 2.5 centimeters. Mailbox color out of standard. Vehicle parked 13 centimeters off alignment. Each violation brought a new fine, each one higher than the last. "Ryan, don't worry about me," Mom would say, carefully putting away her figurines with tears in her eyes. "Let's follow the rules, and they'll leave us alone." But they didn't. No matter how many absurd rules we followed, the fines kept coming. Meanwhile, her health kept getting worse. As her only child, a 35-year-old single guy, I'd moved back home to take care of her after Dad died. It was one Sunday morning when I noticed something off. I was washing the car when I saw Gregory Baker, Susan's husband, messing with something near our water meter. He didn't see me. When he left, I went over to check and noticed small bluish droplets near the connection. Instinctively, I grabbed a sample. I discreetly installed 2 security cameras aimed at the water meter. 3 days later, at 4:38 in the morning, I caught Gregory injecting something into our home's water supply. With the recordings and the sample in hand, I hired a private lab. "Ethylene glycol," the technician said over the phone. "In other words, antifreeze. In small continuous doses, it causes exactly the symptoms you described. Kidney damage, neurological issues." I took everything to the police, convinced that I finally had justice on my side. Detective Johnson looked at me uncomfortably as he closed the file. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your concern, but this isn't enough. The images are dark. We can't clearly see what he's injecting. It might just be a standard water treatment. And as for the antifreeze, it could have come from somewhere else." "My mom is dying," I shouted, unable to believe it. "Bring us something more concrete. Until then, keep your mom away from that water. And honestly, maybe you two should move." That was exactly what they wanted. Our houses sat on the best land in the community, with a view of the lake. Susan had already mentioned expansion plans for that area. We couldn't just abandon our home, the memories, everything my parents worked for. And the police wouldn't do anything. I needed a plan. That's when I discovered something unusual about Oak Ridge Estates. Unlike most condos, our water didn't come straight from the city. It came from a private company, Riverflow LLC. I got curious and started researching. "Riverflow is practically bankrupt," explained Christopher, my college buddy turned lawyer specializing in water rights. "The owner's been trying to ditch it for years. But here's the interesting part. Whoever buys the company gets full control over the water supply for the condo." An idea began to form. It was risky, radical, and it meant putting my entire financial future on the line. But when I got home and saw Mom hooked up to a dialysis machine, I knew I had no choice. "How much?" I asked Christopher. $420,000. It's a bargain for a water company, even if it's bankrupt. I pulled out all my savings. I sold my investments. I mortgaged my share of the house. I took out loans. In 2 weeks, I was the new owner of Riverflow LLC. With the Riverflow contract in hand, I didn't waste any time. That same afternoon, I stopped sending bills by mail and set up the new online system. The email sent to all the residents was straightforward. "Water service fees will increase by 400% starting tomorrow. Any questions? Contact the new owner." I signed it with my name and personal number. My phone blew up with calls. Most of the residents were furious, of course. Some threatened lawsuits. Others said they'd call the authorities. I had expected that. I hired Daniel, a neighbor who worked in water treatment and had also suffered from unjust fines from the HOA, to manage the daily operations of the company. "Ryan, are you really willing to go all the way with this?" Daniel asked while adjusting the valves at the river flow control center. "If the police won't act, then I will. They're poisoning my mom, Daniel. Poisoning her." At 6 p.m. that day, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Susan Baker, in a controlled voice, demanded an immediate meeting. I agreed to meet her at the HOA office after dinner. The HOA office had always felt oppressive to me, with its framed boards of rules and photos of Susan receiving Excellence in Community Management awards. Gregory was beside her, trying to look intimidating. Jonathan Reed, the treasurer, sat silently in a corner. "This is extortion!" Susan shouted when she saw me walk in. "Increasing the water price by 400% is illegal. We've already contacted the regulators." I smiled calmly and placed a dossier on the table. "Before we go any further, I'd like you to look at this." The file contained the camera footage, the lab tests, and my mom's medical history. "I have no idea what this is," Gregory stuttered, his face turning red with nervousness. "Ethylene glycol, antifreeze, in the water at the house where my 72-year-old mom lives. A substance that, in small continuous doses, causes exactly the health issues she's been suffering from over the past months." Susan crossed her arms, her posture stiff. "This is absurd. You're accusing us based on dark images and a test you could have easily tampered with?" "The police said the same thing. That's why we're here right now." I leaned forward, looking them straight in the eye. "You have 3 options. First, publicly admit what you did and step down from your HOA positions. Second, fight my ownership of Riverflow in court, which would take months while you continue paying 400% more for your water. Third, everyone in the community loses water until we settle this." Susan's face went pale. "You can't just cut off water to an entire community." "Actually, I can. I checked with 3 different lawyers. State regulations allow for water cutoffs for technical or commercial reasons with a 24-hour notice. That notice was sent today at 3:42 p.m. Jonathan Reed finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Susan, maybe we should consider—" "Shut up, Jonathan," Susan snapped. Then she turned to me and continued, "This is just a bluff. You wouldn't hurt hundreds of innocent people." I placed one last document on the table, a complete list of residents who had experienced problems with the HOA over the years, followed by unexplained hospitalizations. "I have one more demand besides stepping down. I want a fund set up with the HOA money to cover my mom's medical expenses. And I suspect others on this list deserve compensation too." Gregory paled, nervously glancing at his wife. This is extortion," Susan repeated, though her voice no longer held any conviction. "No, Susan. This is justice." I left the meeting with an ultimatum: 48 hours to accept my conditions, or the water supply would be shut off. I didn't feel good about threatening to cut off water to innocent neighbors, but I needed to force a confession. Daniel already had an emergency plan to provide clean drinking water to those not involved in Susan's schemes, just in case things went that far. That same night, Susan fought back. She called an emergency HOA meeting for the next day and sent out notices to everyone with the subject line, "Water Crisis and Illegal Actions by Ryan Morrison." The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community hall. I arrived 30 minutes early to prepare my presentation. To my surprise, Olivia Rodriguez, a neighbor who had always been kind to my mom, approached me. "Ryan, I heard your mom is really sick. How is she doing?" "Stable, but the poisoning has caused permanent kidney damage. She'll need dialysis for the rest of her life." Olivia frowned. "Poisoning? Susan said you were making up stories to justify that absurd water hike." "That's exactly why I'm here today." The hall filled up quickly. Susan, Gregory, and Jonathan took the board seats at the front. Susan banged the gavel to call everyone to order and launched into her rehearsed speech about how I was blackmailing the community and abusing an essential resource. When it was my turn to speak, I hooked my laptop up to the projector. The first image showed my mom in the hospital, hooked up to tubes and machines. "This is Patricia Morrison, my mom, 72, widowed. 6 months ago, she questioned the fee hike proposed by the current board. Since then, we've received 27 fines for rule violations that never bothered anyone in the 15 years we've lived here." I showed the footage of Gregory tampering with the water meter, the lab test results, and finally, a graph correlating his nightly visits with my mom's hospitalizations. "What you're seeing is a systematic pattern of poisoning, and it's not just my mom." I then highlighted other cases. Martha Williams, 68, hospitalized 3 times after contesting the removal of native trees. James Peterson, 75, suffering neurological issues after voting against the entrance remodeling. The Gupta family, whose 10-year-old son mysteriously got sick after they complained about noise from the Baker household. The hall fell completely silent. Then, slowly, people started speaking up. More cases surfaced. More coincidences were noted. Susan tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. "Are you really buying into these absurd accusations without solid proof?" she yelled, her face red with fury. "He's manipulating you." An elderly lady stood up, trembling. "My husband died 3 months ago. The doctors said it was multiple organ failure. A month before, we refused to sell our house for the HOA expansion project. The tension was palpable." I continued. "I bought Riverflow LLC not to hurt anyone, but to make sure no one else gets poisoned. I raised the prices to force those in power to admit to their crimes." Susan yelled, pointing at me. "That's defamation. I'm gonna sue you for every last cent." At that moment, Jonathan Reed slowly stood up. His voice was shaking but clear. I knew about the health issues. Susan showed me a list of problems that needed fixing, people who were in the way of her plans for the condo. I didn't know about the poisoning, I swear to God, but I suspected something was wrong. Chaos broke out. Gregory tried to slip out quietly, but 2 neighbors blocked him at the door. Susan shouted accusations of betrayal at Jonathan. Residents started shouting questions and demanding explanations. Amid the confusion, my phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message with a video file attached. I quickly downloaded it, and when I watched it, my heart started racing. It was exactly what I needed. My fingers were trembling as I connected my phone to the projector, cutting through the chaos in the meeting. The still image on screen showed the private office of the Bakers. "Everyone, please, quiet!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the hall. "I just got something you need to see." When I hit play, the video showed Susan and Gregory Baker in their home office. The date in the lower corner said 3 months ago. "How long until we get the old Morrison house?" Gregory asked, fiddling with a bottle holding a bluish liquid. "It depends on how much you put in," Susan replied calmly as she organized some documents. "The dosage needs to be enough to cause serious symptoms, but not enough to kill instantly. We don't want a homicide investigation." "I already did it with the Williams, the Petersons, and the Guptas too," Gregory added, closing the bottle. "Are we hitting too many targets at once?" Susan smiled, the same smile she flashed at HOA meetings. "We need those lots for the expansion. The developer isn't going to wait forever. Every house we get for below market value earns us more commission." "And what if someone dies accidentally?" Gregory asked. "Old people die all the time, honey. No one investigates when a 70-year-old goes into kidney failure." The video went on for another 2 minutes, detailing the plans, mentioning other residents, and discussing who would be the next convinced to sell. With every second, the horror on everyone's face grew. When the video ended, silence fell over the room. Then the silence was broken by the sound of the door opening. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, led by Detective Johnson, the very same detective who had dismissed my claims weeks ago. "Susan Baker, Gregory Baker, you're under arrest for attempted multiple homicide, criminal conspiracy, and premeditated poisoning," he announced formally. As they handcuffed the couple, Susan started yelling hysterically that the video was fake and that I had made everything up. Gregory, however, completely broke down. "She made me do it," he whimpered. "It was her idea. I was just following orders." Detective Johnson came over to me while his colleagues escorted the couple out. "We received the same video an hour ago, sent anonymously, along with other damning documents. I'm sorry I doubted you before, Mr. Morrison. We never found out who sent the video. I suspect it was either Jonathan Reed, seeking redemption for his silent complicity, or maybe the Baker's secretary who worked at their house 3 times a week. The important thing is that we finally had justice." The next few days were intense. The police searched the Baker's home and found a detailed diary kept by Susan, listing every target, the methods used, and notes on the progression of each victim's declining health. There were at least 17 people in the complex being systematically poisoned, each at a different stage. The news exploded locally and then nationally. They called it the poisoned condo. Reporters camped at our entrance for weeks. The story even inspired a special episode on a true crime show. Meanwhile, with the HOA in ruins after the arrest of its president and treasurer, I called a general meeting to decide the future of Riverflow LLC and the HOA itself. "I don't want to continue as the owner of the water company," I told the gathered residents. "I bought it out of necessity, not ambition." With some help from Christopher, my lawyer friend, we came up with a plan. Riverflow LLC would be transferred to a community fund managed by an independent board elected by the residents. Profits would be reinvested in condo improvements and in a specific fund for covering the medical expenses of the victims. Daniel, who'd helped me from the start, took the job of operations director for the company. Olivia Rodriguez, who later moved to Jenkins after getting married, was elected president of the new HOA, committed to transparency and community participation. "What happened here can never happen again," Olivia said in her inaugural speech. "Rules are meant to bring us together as a community, not be used as weapons for control and persecution." Justice kept moving forward. 3 months after the arrests, the trial took place. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, Susan's detailed diary, the victims' testimonies, and lab tests confirming ethylene glycol in samples taken from several houses in the complex. Susan Baker was sentenced to 12 years for attempted multiple homicide, conspiracy, and poisoning. Gregory received the same sentence, with the possibility of parole after 8 years for cooperating with the investigation. Jonathan Reed got 3 years in a semi-open regime for being a passive accomplice. The most shocking part was learning the full scope of the operation. Susan was in contact with presidents of other neighborhood associations in the region, sharing persuasion techniques to remove undesirable residents. Authorities launched investigations in at least 6 other complexes after our case. For my mom, though, the damage was done. Doctors confirmed she'd need dialysis for the rest of her life, her kidneys permanently damaged by prolonged poisoning. But at least she was no longer in constant danger. "You did it, son," she said one day when I was finally able to bring her home after weeks in the hospital. "You saved not only me, but so many others." Using part of the compensation from the Bakers' seized assets, we modified our home to meet her new medical needs. We hired a nurse to help her during dialysis, and slowly, her strength came back. A month after the trial, Olivia knocked on our door with a proposal. "We want to create a community space in honor of the victims, especially your mom who suffered the most. A healing garden, a place where people can reflect and find peace." Mom loved the idea. Her only request was to be allowed to place her ceramic figurines there. "Each one represents a memory with your dad," she explained. "Now they can represent our community's resilience." The inauguration of the Patricia Morrison Healing Garden took place on a sunny spring afternoon, 6 months after the arrest of the Bakers. To our surprise, many residents brought their own ceramic figurines to add to the garden, forming a colorful path of solidarity. "This represents our journey," Mom told those gathered as she leaned on her cane. "From a place of fear and poisoning to one of healing and unity." Watching that scene, I realized how much our community had changed. What was once a divided complex, ruled by fear and oppressive rules, had become a true home where neighbors looked out for one another. Riverflow LLC, now managed by the Community Fund, used part of its profits to install the most modern water quality monitoring system available. Any suspicious change triggered instant alerts and automatically stopped the affected supply. No one would ever again be secretly poisoned in Oak Ridge Estates. The colorful figurines, which had once been a reason for persecution, now represented the new spirit of the community. Each one told a different story, not only of my parents' memories, but also of how a community united against tyranny and crime. At one of the monthly meetings of the new HOA, we all agreed to change the name of our community. Oak Ridge Estates officially became Morrison Gardens, in honor of not only my mom, but everyone who suffered under the Baker regime. "How's the water today?" Mom asked with a smile as we sat on the central bench in the garden, watching kids play happily around the colorful figurines. "Crystal clear," I replied, holding her wrinkled hand. The case even changed state policies. New laws were passed to more strictly regulate homeowners' associations and to require periodic independent checks of private water systems. Informally, people called it the Patricia Law, even though the official name was more technical. We turned tragedy into positive change. Mom, although physically weaker, found a new strength as a symbol of resistance, and I found my purpose helping other communities establish transparent management systems. The water, which had once been used as a weapon against us, became a symbol of our collective strength. Clean, clear, essential, just as it was always meant to be. The colorful figurines still stand there today, growing in number every year when we celebrate Renewal Day, marking the date the Bakers were arrested. Each new piece represents a story of overcoming, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find clarity when we come together for a just cause. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. The water was never cut off again in Morrison Gardens. It flows freely, just like it should, pure, clear, Safe. A right, not a privilege. A symbol of life, not of death. Exactly how it should have been from the start.